Mary Alice.
Good morning.
At 9:01, Department of Early Childhood Friends, is there anyone we should wait for?
I think we're good, Katie.
Okay, and then I recall you have a slide. Who should I give permission to share screens?
So you can start with me, Katie.
Okay.
And Katie, Dawn will be on in a little bit, and then she'll share her slides as well.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for dealing with the housekeeping. We haven't done one of these early childhood check-ins in a while, so it's good to see you, CDEC friends. Thanks for being here early on a Wednesday. So yeah, I think we're going to spend most of our time talking about CCAP and those changes we have coming forward, and then a little bit of time on UPK. So I will just hand it off to you all.
Great. I can get us started. And I'm so sorry, but we are not allowed to join meetings that have the AI note takers. So Katie, if you wouldn't mind removing those, that would be awesome. Appreciate that. So I'll introduce myself really quickly, and then Mary Alice and Terry, if you want to introduce yourselves as well before we jump in. But I'm Sarah Dawson. I am the new CCAP Division Director, and I've been on board about 3 months. And you all may have known me from my position at Department of Human Services, where I was there 5 years previously, but really excited to be in this new role and talk with you all about CCAP today. Mary Alice?
Great, thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Alice Cohen. I'm Chief Program Officer at the Department of Early Childhood, and we're grateful for this opportunity to be with you all today to discuss the pretty dramatic changes that we're going through as a state based on federal regulations. And Sarah's put together a fantastic slide deck, and we want to be sure to allow plenty of time for conversation as well, any questions that you may have. And I will hand it over to you now, Terry.
Hey everybody, my name is Terry Pinney. I'm the Economic Mobility and County Relations Liaison for CDEC. And I just put this together with Katie.
Great. So I'll go ahead and jump into the presentation we have this morning about CCAP, but please feel free. I want this to be a discussion, so stop me anytime with questions. And I'll start with a little bit of background about the program currently, and then we'll jump into about 16 changes that we all have coming for us in the next 2 years. So to start, really kind of what is CCAP? What's the purpose? What's the scope? And so CCAP is here to really provide eligible household with access to high quality, affordable childcare. And we know that when families have access to that, it really supports healthy child development, school readiness, and self-sufficiency for families and giving them informed childcare choices. So currently on average, CCAP serves almost 29,000 children a year through almost 2,500 licensed providers in the state, by 500 county workers that work for you all. And just so you know, there's about 5,000 licensed providers in the state of Colorado. So only about half right now actually accept and serve CCAP children. And we'll get into kind of why that might be and how some of these coming changes we're hoping will get that number up. So as you all know, I don't have to tell you, CCAP is a county administered program, and it is mainly federal dollars with some state money as well, and then the county MOE as well for the funding streams for CCAP. There are 3 different types of CCAP, which is really important to remember as we talk about the changes that are coming up, because it impacts these 3 different types of CCAP differently. So first, the main type of CCAP that your county is most aware of is low-income CCAP. And so those are families who qualify based on their FPL. We also have Colorado Works CCAP. So those who are participating in TANF or Colorado Works here in Colorado also get access to the CCAP program. And then lastly, Child Welfare and Child Protective Services also have a specialized population to get access to CCAP as well. Okay, so that was kind of just quickly the background on where CCAP is today, and then we can jump into the super fun 16 rules that we all have. So in March of this year, our federal partners, the Administration for Children and Families, published a sweeping rule package that really aims to provide increased childcare access, affordability, and stabilizing the childcare sector. As we all know, especially we learned through COVID, how important the childcare sector really is to our overall economy here in Colorado, and really allowing families to be in the workforce and having a safe, quality place for their child to be during the day. So these changes are complex for us. On one hand, we are really excited because overall, they're helping to lower the cost of childcare for families. They're really improving how we pay providers to match closer to how private pay rates go. So that's where we're really hoping we can get more providers to accept CCAP and serve our CCAP families. Also, we're hoping that these changes will lead to higher wages for our early childhood workforce, which is really, really important to make sure that we're building up the sector and that those who are with our little ones all day can have a sustainable wage. And then lastly, we always want to be improving how folks enroll in CCAP and making that easier for them. However, these really good changes did not come with any additional federal funding, which means we will be spending significantly more per child in the program. So what that means for us is that we'll be serving fewer families, especially serving fewer new families coming into the program. And counties are going to have a really, really difficult time managing to their allocations for a few reasons. CCAP has what I call kind of continuous eligibility. So the only way that children are no longer receiving CCAP is if their caregivers are no longer in an eligible activity, which is working, job search, or education, or their income reaches 85% SMI. So on average, we found that a child receives CCAP for about 3 years. So that means that counties in the state, we have to be planning kind of our fiscal landscape at least 3 years in advance, because we know once a child is on, it takes on average 3 years before we're no longer serving them in CCAP. One really important piece here, and why I wanted to highlight the 3 different types of CCAP, is if a county goes on a wait list or freeze, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, and some counties are already on those. Children whose families are receiving TANF or are part of child welfare still have to be served by CCAP. So those children bypass a waitlist or freeze. So there is still some new families that will be served from your county CCAP program, even if your county is on a waitlist or freeze. So that's just a really important piece to remember as we're kind of thinking about the budgets and how to serve folks. Okay, any questions on kind of the high level before I jump into some of the changes in more detail? All right. So we are trying to kind of parse out all these different changes that we have in front of us into several different rule packages. As you all know, after statute is passed or new federal regulations come down, we have to promulgate rule to really solidify what those changes mean here for us in Colorado. So the 4 on this screen are going to be part of an emergency rule package that's coming in January of this year. The reason that these are part of an emergency rule package is because they are not what we're calling waiver eligible, or they came from House Bill 241223 that has a sooner implementation date. So for the vast majority of the federal changes that we have, we applied for a waiver that allows us to wait until August of 2026 for those new rules to be effective. So once we get past this slide, we'll talk about kind of those rules that we've got more time to dig in on. These 4 have to be implemented right away, hence why we're going through an emergency rule package. So first is about 12-month eligibility. So currently, when your county CCAP workers are working with a family, every 12 months, they kind of redetermine their eligibility for the program. Right now, the way that we do it, if a child is added to a home and added to CCAP, their eligibility is within that original 12 months. So let's say you got your first child is approved for CCAP, then you have a second child 11 months later. That second child right now only has 1 month of eligibility. The feds have clarified that that is not appropriate. So we did get an audit finding for that. So what that means is when a new child is added, all children on that case are going to be moved out 12 months before their eligibility is looked at again. Next is a piece about background checks and adding child pornography to our background check requirements. Great news, we already do this. We just have to codify it in rule that we already do this. And then the bottom 2 are from House Bill 241223 that passed last year. The first one is about customer service expectations in our performance contracts with counties. So as you all know, county commissioners, you sign an MOU with CDEC for your county to administer CCAP every year. This bill is requiring us to add more to the customer services outlined requirement in the MOU. We want to take our time working with counties on what that should really look like, but we do need to go ahead and put it in rule so that we are compliant with 1223. So our plan is to go ahead and put it in this January rule package and then take probably about 3 to 6 months, depending on how much partnering and stakeholdering we have with the counties to really decide how to amend the MOU based on this new customer service definition. And then last, 1223 requires education to be an eligible activity. Previously, that was an option for counties, so that option is no longer on the table and education must be an eligible activity. Again, great news on this one. All counties currently offer that, so we will now be putting in rule that that option will be taken off the table and everyone will just continue to have education as one of those eligible activities. Okay, question on those 4. Have I lost folks yet? I know it's a lot of information. Okay. Okay, now we get into the really big stuff that is coming for us August of 2026. So we've got kind of 4 different buckets here of changes that came from our federal partners. So the biggest one is about improving payments to childcare providers. So again, the intent here from the feds is really to have CCAP or the subsidy program mirror how private pay works for childcare providers as much as possible. So the biggest one is going to enrollment-based payment. So currently today, CCAP only pays a provider when a child is actually in care. And as you all know, I have an 11-month-old. She has made some appearances on meetings lately. Kids get sick. right? And they don't go to daycare, but the provider still has to have the teachers and the building and all of those things, right? And so paying based on enrollment means that a provider is going to get their payment for the whole time that the child is enrolled there, not just when they show up. The price tag on this one is large. It is the largest of all of our changes right now. We are estimating that it's going to be $33 million ongoing. One important piece of this is currently today for infants and toddlers, we do pay based on enrollment. That was one of our stimulus funded strategies that had a really, really strong return on investment for how many providers started accepting CCAP and how many infants and toddlers started receiving care through the program. So we're excited for those outcomes to translate to our other age groups, but we are worried about how much money this is going to cost, and with no additional federal support, what that really means for the program. Next, when it comes to paying providers, we are going to start paying them prospectively. So before care is actually received. Again, very similar to private pay. When I pay for my daughter, I pay at the beginning of the month so that they have their money to pay their staff and their rent and all of those things before, right? But for CCAP right now, we pay after the child has received care. So this will switch. The good news for us here is it does have a rather large one-time cost in our IT system, but there is no ongoing cost for this one. Next is paying registration fees. Some counties actually already do this. If I'm remembering correct, I think about 26 already pay the registration fees. So the ongoing cost for this is only about 1.3 million, where all counties will be required to pay those registration fees. Okay, last on how we pay providers is we are increasing their rates. This one is really, really important, and I should actually make a different citation on this slide because this is going into effect October 1st. But we wanted to make sure it's not part of the new rule package. We want to capture it here so that everyone can really understand the whole ecosystem of changes happening for CCAP. So our federal partners let us know previously when we worked on a market rate study for reimbursement for providers that was not in compliance with how we were supposed to pay providers. So last year we started going down the path of what is called the alternative rate methodology. So that's looking at a different way for how we decide the rate to pay providers for CCAP. And really that methodology was trying to gather what the true cost of care is so that a provider doesn't have to find other funding streams in order to serve children who are on CCAP. The cost of this one is $20.4 million overall. So again, a super large price tag, and unfortunately, no new money came for this one either. The way that we are trying to help kind of afford this is by spacing it out over 3 federal fiscal years. So starting October 1st, a third of these costs will increase. The next October, the second, third, and then the following October, it will be fully implemented. So we anticipate starting October 1st, until the following October, about 6.8 million will be added to the cost for the CCAP program. Okay, that one was a lot. Questions? I think we all have concerns, but happy to hear those as well. Jill, please go ahead.
Thank you. This is just a simple question. With the enrollment-based pay, which I totally understand and get, what if I was a parent and I didn't show up? Like I said, I'd be there for 5 days and I'm only there for 1 day and this has gone on for 6 months. Like, is there some point where it's like, we need to reassess, Jill, that you're not showing up all those days?
Yes, absolutely. So this is one, thankfully, right, we've got till August of 26. So we're really going to want to dig in with a rule rewrite committee, with our counties, with our providers on what is the right balance here to make sure that we are good stewards of this money and really working with families to only pay when the child really needs that care. So right now, how it works for infants and toddlers is your county workers get a report if there's an unexcused absence for 22 days straight. And that kind of flags your worker to reach out to the family, see what's going on, see if they still need that amount of care. We think that we'll probably revise that and work really closely again with counties. Like, what is that right trigger to reach out to a family and see if they still need that appropriate care? The good news is too, other states already do enrollment-based pay. So we're working with our federal partners right now to kind of gather all of those lessons learned from other states that have already done this. So we can bring that to the discussion with you all and kind of decide what that right trigger is. Great. Heather, go ahead.
Good morning. Good to see you all. I feel like we see each other almost daily at this point. But I appreciate this different format because I feel like every time I hear this presentation, I pick up something new each time, and it's still struggling to wrap my head around this. So I think you said it was the alternative rate methodology that's driving the implementation over the next 3 years of the 20 million. What is the deadline that the feds have given us to have that fully implemented?
Yeah, so Mary Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's based on our approved state plan, which is over 3 years. So that's why we kind of spaced it out over those 3 years to stay in compliance within that 3-year period for the state plan. But Mary Alice, I've only been on the job 3 months, so please correct me if I got that wrong.
Yes, that is correct, Sarah. There's one other nuance here, Heather, and that is this was an audit finding that we were not paid at the appropriate rate. And so so that is why we were required to implement it beginning October 1.
Great. Any other questions on improving payments to providers before we jump to the next 3 changes that are coming? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Stuart.
Hey, Sarah, thank you. One other tidbit, same as Heather, I've been learning a lot as I've been listening to the presentation in various venues. In the allocation committee meeting, you mentioned that the way that the costs are absorbed in the allocation formula for the CCAP provider rate increase is occurring differently this year than it will occur in the next 2 years. Is that right? And can you explain that again?
Yeah, so for the CCAP allocation committee, that is the group with counties and state together deciding what the formula is to allocate out this pot of money. And so we just started those meetings in August. And so we'll continue to work together. Right now, we've just got options on the table for us to start kind of sussing out. And we do need to find a way to make sure that we are accounting for these increased rates in the allocation formula. How we do that, we've got a few months to work together to kind of figure that out. Because one thing we know, and we're running the data on now, is that the increased rates are going to hit different counties differently. So overall, from the state perspective, right, we're going to see this 20.4 million increase. That's going to be different county to county. So that's some of the data we're running right now too, to kind of see how that's going to play out, and that can help us inform decisions in the allocation committee as well. Great. Sorry, Mary Alice, do you want to go before we jump to Summer?
No, please go, Summer. I'll jump in after.
Oh, thank you, Mary Alice, and thanks, Sarah. And this may be something you're going to cover later on, so I apologize if you already discussed it. As you're talking about these increased costs, how do you expect them to be reflected in your budget requests, coming forward this November? And how are you, you've mentioned how you tried to phase over 3 years because of the increased costs in some areas, but do you have kind of a general number that you're going to have to request? And I guess secondary to that, how does this intersect with the UPK budget? Is there any intersection there at all?
Yeah. So and later in the slides, we'll kind of get into what is the overall cost for us over the next few state fiscal years. But we all know here what the Colorado budget forecast looks like, right? And unfortunately, we know there is not general fund to go around this coming year. And so we are going to be in a really tight spot. These are driven by federal changes, though. So we are really pushing at the federal level to help get the money needed for these new changes for us. And then when it comes to universal preschool, right now, the way it works is that you can stack the UPK and CCAP funds. We do have an RFP that is about to go out or might already be out. That's going to help do an evaluation across UPK, CCAP, and Head Start on what is the best way to blend and braid those funds. So we really want to wait until that study is done to kind of inform any of those decisions moving forward. Yeah, Mary Alice.
Great. So Sarah, there's a question in the chat for you.
Thank you.
Please, sure. Could you please repeat the prospective pay payments?
Yeah. So prospective pay means that we are paying a provider in advance of the child receiving care. Right now, we pay after the child has gone to the provider. So we'll do it up front, very similar to how private pay families do. And there's no ongoing cost to that. There is a one-time, I think it's about 1.3 million cost to change our data system in order to do that, but there's no ongoing cost for that one. And then let's see, Heather, how quickly can counties receive the data on how the rate changes will impact them? I'll follow up with our data analyst, Heather. I think we were hoping to have it by the allocation committee next week, but I'll make sure that we're still on track for that. Great. Okay, any other questions before we jump into the next three really quickly?
Sarah, I'm sorry. As the host, I can't raise my hand, which seems like a failing, but whatever. Is it only human services directors that serve on the allocation committee? I should know that, but I cannot recall. Or maybe one of the directors knows.
Yes, I believe it's just human services directors right now, and I'm happy to get you all that. Or staff.
Or staff. I think there are some of our financial experts on there too.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And happy to get you the list of everyone who's on that committee as well.
That would be great.
Yeah. I will say though, when it comes to that committee, right, the only thing that we're working on there is how to divide out the money. Unfortunately, how much money we have is how much money we have, right? So those conversations are hard because at the end of the day, we know that it's not enough. Okay, moving to kind of the next three buckets of changes we've got here quickly. So the second one is about lowering childcare costs for families. So the really big push from the federal level for a while has been guidance to limit family copays to 7% of income. Now it is a requirement. Colorado, again, had used stimulus money to help get closer to this 7% over the last few years. So currently we cap out at about 10% of a family's income. And we have a marginal rate increase here in Colorado. And so that will continue as well, because one of the requirements of a waiver is that you don't increase the costs of the copays in the interim before you become effective with the new rule in August. So we will continue with our current copay formula, and then effective August 1st, we'll have to change that formula. And right now we think that ongoing cost is going to be about $10.3 million. Then the second really small piece here is about increasing consumer education. And that's really about helping families understand how to calculate their copayment, to do better budgeting and things of that nature. So we'll update our website that's got the parent fee formula calculator on it, and really, really try to support counties and providers in helping to share with families how they can plan financially for their copay. Okay, last two buckets of changes. Making enrollment easier and faster for families is another really big push from the federal level that we absolutely agree with. Really great news. We're actually in compliance with the federal piece of this because we do provide our CCAP application online through PEAK. There's a lot of states right now that don't actually have online applications. That's really what they had pushed for the federal level. These bullets here actually come mostly from House Bill 24-1223. And so it's about kind of limiting the information that we can collect, really making sure that we're pairing with other programs that families are receiving, and being really clear in our redetermination process and trying to make that easier as well. Again, this one will have some one-time costs in changing the system, but no major ongoing costs. Okay, lastly is increasing childcare options for families. So we are required to provide slot contracts or a guaranteed spot that you pay for all the time, whether there's a child signed or enrolled in that spot or not, for 3 different populations. So one is underserved geographic areas, infants and toddlers, and children with disabilities. We have had mixed results here in Colorado with slot contracts. As Heather knows, Larimer is currently the only county that provides slot contracts. So we're really looking at this one to come into compliance with this rule, but not really go above and beyond, because we haven't seen it be successful here in Colorado to really increase those childcare options. Okay, questions on any of those 3 buckets? And let me make sure I'm actually checking the chat this time. Yeah, Martha.
Sarah and Mary Alice. So with the slot contracts, what you just said disturbed me even more than already, as far as, so we have to have them for 3 different populations. So if we have an underserved geographic area in our county, we have to have a slot contract like in that area. We have to have a separate one for infants and toddlers, and we have to have a different one for children with disabilities.
So Martha, that is a very good point, right? Like, how we could not have 64 counties have to have all of these 3 slots. Like, that's a lot. Some counties don't even serve 3 children, and then we'll ask them to do 3 slots. So we had talked about this at the last work session, and I think we should talk about it more tomorrow too, but we're actually considering if we should run this at the state level, because there's no way that especially small and medium counties can really abide by this new requirement. And like I said, unfortunately, we're kind of looking at this one just to get into compliance. So theoretically, we could have 2 slots for underserved geographic areas, 2 for infants and toddlers, and 2 with children for disabilities across the entire state, and be in compliance with this new rule. But this is one, again, don't have to be effective till August 1st of 26. We really want to work with you all on what the options could be and what this could look like.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I mean, thinking about like San Juan County, which is always the one I think about, which is my smallest county. If I have 1 kid in full-time care, I exceed my very small allocation. And so if I had a slot and there wasn't a kid in it, that would be horrible. And it sounds like you can't not have a slot. So I mean, from what I know at this point, I would be all in favor of it at the state level rather than the county level.
Yeah, I think that that's going to be the best path for us. But again, we've got time to really dig in and make sure that that's where we should go. And Lainey, I see your comment. I think about you every time with the slot contracts about how can we figure this out for the county run facility. So you're on my mind. Absolutely. Okay, we'll go to Annie, and then I'll go to Catherine's question in the chat.
Do you know how the underserved geographic areas are going to be defined?
Ooh, good question. I don't think that it's actually defined more than that in federal guidance. So I think that would be something for us to kind of figure out through the rulemaking process. And then Catherine asked, what is the estimated cost for a slot contract? So our previous kind of historical numbers show that per child in CCAP, we spent about $7,000 a year. When we move to enrollment-based payment, which these slot contracts will be under that, plus a slot contract in itself is kind of already based on enrollment, we're thinking it's going to be about $17,000 per child. So that's what we're estimating right now, about $17,000 per slot contract. So if we do 6 overall, it's about $100,000. Heather, go ahead.
Sarah, I would say that estimate is very low.
Okay.
For Larimer's we have actually asked for approval from your team to stop our slot-based contract
Yeah.
because it's costing us $12,000 a month
Oh,
for no
okay.
kids to be
Super
served.
good. Yep.
So for us, it's $144,000 a year, and we haven't had a kid go into those slots. And so because we're projected to be significantly overspent, we just can't continue to do it at a time when it's not yet required. And I do think that there are ways we could develop a plan when it does become required, that we're still meeting those federal requirements. And it's being able to show we have 5, maybe it's 5 slot-based contracts that serve children with disabilities. I think that there's a way we can report back to the feds that will show that we're compliant without having each county have 3 very customized slot-based contracts. Because it does depend on which provider you choose, what their rates are. So if your highest quality rated provider says, yes, I will do a slot-based contract, that their rate is going to drive the contract amount too.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that, Heather. I will want to dive in more from you all's experience as well. So we'll check in. Yeah, Terry, go ahead.
Point of housekeeping, we have about 5 more minutes for this discussion if we want to save time for the universal preschool presentation.
Great. Thanks, Terry. I think I've got one more slide, if I'm remembering correctly. Yes. So really quickly, these 4 boxes are the additional House Bill 24-1223 requirements that are in no way tied to the new federal rules. So one is that we're going to be increasing access for substance use disorder treatment. And we did get money for this one, so that's exciting. And that ongoing funding starts in state fiscal year 26-27. And then we did get funding for state fiscal year 25-26 to make changes in our database chats to help with this one. So we'll be working with counties on that timeline to do rules for this piece. Next, we are required to do a pilot program for a qualified exempt provider. So qualified exempt providers are typically a relative or a close family or friend that watches a child. Right now, the way that someone becomes a qualified exempt provider is a family comes in seeking CCAP and they identify who they want to be that qualified exempt provider. This pilot is switching that. It's going to see, could we get more qualified exempt providers if we had someone who lived in a neighborhood and wanted to watch children during the day, for them to kind of apply to be a qualified exempt provider. So that's just a pilot, and we did get an FTE for that. The last 2 really quickly is that now employers will be allowed to pay for a family's co-payment. So that's something that we'll also work through in rule, and there's not an ongoing cost to that one. And then lastly, we will be commissioning a study this state fiscal year on what our options are to separate out the Children and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP, from CCAP or CCDF funded programs. And that's just a study that we will complete this year and then kind of go from there on the recommendations. Okay, that is all I have for you all when it comes to the CCAP changes. Please know it's a lot. We're in it together. Already had a lot of sleepless nights. I know a lot of you county folks have too, but we're here and we're going to make it through. Heather, go ahead.
Just really quick before we switch on that last point for the CACFP. I think I got the acronym right. So when the department was created from, is that the House Bill in 21? I forget what year, but that was one of the programs that we looked at whether it should actually move to the Department of Early Childhood. And I think the next date to revisit that is actually next year. So if there is a way to actually include that as part of the study about delinking of which state department should actually be the home for that program, I think that would be really helpful.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Heather. I'm working on the RFP right now, so that's great. Okay. Yeah, Heather.
Hey, Sarah. I was wondering,
if you have a number of how much all of these costs put together are estimated to cost for each year. So the things that are being implemented earlier and then for the stuff in 2026, but is there a total amount that you easily already have pulled together? Yes, and I also gave it to Megan Burge so that it could be included in you all's budget letter. But we're looking at for state fiscal year 25-26, about 15 million underfunded. And then starting 26-27, about 50 million underfunded ongoing. And I will put in the chat here in a moment. We've got an ongoing document that includes all of the pieces I went over today, how much money they are, what the IT costs are. And one thing to really pay attention to of the document I plop in is make it to the conclusion section. We worked with counties to write that. And I think it's a really good starting place for folks for talking points when inevitably the media is probably going to contact you as more counties go on wait lists and freezes and those kinds of things. So I'll put that in the chat here in a moment.
Just one more question from me, and sorry, Terry and Don, to further delay our UPK portion, but Sarah, do you have like a timeline, or maybe it's in this document of kind of like, here's when certain things are due and kind of working backwards when like the rulemaking and all that will be going on? Because I think that might be able to help me help the director, help the directors, and then I can help inform their commissioners and keep them informed of kind of how things are progressing and when they're going to start getting lots of phone calls about why can't I get my kid on CCAP from their constituents at the grocery store.
Yeah. So to be fully transparent, we are kind of expecting that all large counties will be on a wait list or freeze by January. And again, a lot of that is really driven by that alternative rate methodology, that increase in provider rates, which is actually separate from all of the new rule changes that are coming. And that change does not require rule. As Mary Alice had pointed out, we had a compliance finding, so we had to start doing that. When it comes to the timeline, Katie, this is one of the things that's keeping me up at night. We've got that emergency rule package. We know that's going to go in January. And then we think we're going to have a July 2025 package and probably an April 26 package. And in both of those, a lot of them will still have effective dates for August 1st of 26. But we do have to go ahead and making those changes. We don't want to do everything all at once right at the end. But we are going to be recruiting for the CCAP rule rewrite committee. We're working on kind of what that makeup's going to be and an application process, and Heather and Katie will be reaching out to you. And so that's really the group that's going to help us decide what's the right sequencing and the right steps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready for Dawn then? Get some universal preschool news. Take it away, Dawn.
All right, I'll share. I have a few slides to share, so let me get those going for us. Thank you so much for inviting us to share out and give some updates at this meeting today. We're really excited to be here and to continue to deepen our strategic partnerships as they relate to Colorado Universal Preschool and serving families in each of your unique communities. We do have a new, we did start a new enrollment process based on what we heard from families and from providers for the second year of Colorado Universal Preschool. That included a pre-registration pack. So we heard very clearly from both families and providers again that continuity of care was critical, and the way that we had set that up in the first year was too complex, and really kind of inserted program in between the provider and the family where relationships had already been established. So we made an adjustment for 24-25 school year to ensure that continuity of care could be honored we know that yields strong outcomes for children and is supportive of families in staying connected with their providers. So we had a very successful launch of that this year, where we had a pre-registration period, if you will, before we went into matching. We did still have that matching process within the application system for families who were finding formal care for the first time or who might be seeking a new provider. We went through a couple rounds of that, and at this current time, we are in what's called direct placement. As the program year has started, we want to expedite enrollments so that families and children can get access as quickly as possible for the seats that we have remaining open.
Hey, Dawn.
Dawn. Oh, yeah, Mary Alice, I think we're about to say the same thing.
For some reason, your audio keeps kind of going in and out.
Okay. Let me see if I can adjust my settings quickly.
Great. Thank you, Dawn.
Does that sound better? Okay. Apologies for that. Are you able to see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
I had to change my view so that I could get to those settings. So thank you for bearing with me on that. All right, a couple other enhancements we made, and I'll absolutely share this deck as well, were around children with individualized education plans who are participating in special education. Because again, similar to the continuity of care, we had some challenges or pain points where families felt disengaged or disconnected from their provider. And we wanted to ensure that wasn't the case, that we were in alignment with the processes that an IEP engages in with families and providers to make sure that that was very clean and very clear for families. So we're really excited about those enhancements that we made for 24-25 as well. We are about to embark on provider registration and enrollment for 25-26. And so we have taken some time to look at how our second year enhancements played out, talk to families, talk to providers to consider what enhancements we can make for year 3. And predominantly one of the things that we heard was the timing and ensuring that providers have more time to engage in the system and consider programs and seat availability in each unique community, as well as plan for that enrollment timeline that's more in sync with what providers were used to before universal preschool started. So we're really excited about making continuous improvement in that regard and continuing to hear from everyone who's experiencing the system so that we can ensure that ease of access. Our numbers currently are pretty exciting. So this is our numbers to date, September 12th from our data poll. So we have officially 38,230 children who are enrolled and receiving preschool services currently. That's across 64 counties with just under 2,000 providers who have enrolled children. We do have over 2,000 providers participating. We continue to keep the registration open for providers to come in, as we do for families and children to engage. So we do have over 2,000 providers who are participating, with new providers coming in regularly. We were able to retain 97% of providers from year 1. So we're really excited about that. Our first year providers really kind of went through the challenges of startup with us under the compressed timeline we were all under. And so we're super excited that they continue to participate so that families have choice within their regions. During this direct enrollment phase, where families work first with providers and then through our system, we had about 400 new applications last week. And that's typical for us to see an uptick as school starts and families engage at this particular point in time. That is up from our applications in year one. A couple resources that might be helpful. Apologize, the navigating the slide deck here, make sure we're on point. Are to stay connected with your local coordinating organization. So when you receive this deck, I have linked these resources that might be helpful for you all to engage. If you haven't engaged with your local coordinating organization, we do have a list here by county. So you can see where and how you might engage with them to support their community plans as well as navigating universal preschool. We do have a provider dashboard on our website. And what that provider dashboard shows is participating providers by LCO region or by county and the provider type that is available in each community. We are planning to build that dashboard out further to give information about the number of seats available and where children are choosing to enroll, and that will come over time. But right now, what you can see on that dashboard, again, is in real time, the number of participating providers locally. And then, as Sarah had referred to earlier, we do have an informational memo, and this is a link to the memo that allows for the stacking of funds to ensure providers can get to the rate to provide universal preschool while they have families participating in CCAP. And so those will all be available for you through this deck. And definitely want to stay in touch. So if there's anything that's coming up unique to your community that we can be supportive of, please reach out. You may also email me directly. Absolutely open to that. I think the other thing that I didn't have in the deck that Sarah mentioned that I think is really important to know is that by law, universal preschool is required to have an independent evaluation. And one portion of that is the finance blending and braiding. So we've been working very closely also with the Colorado Action Lab to go through an RFP process to find that vendor. And we're in that process for that kind of financial blending and braiding piece. That engagement with this vendor for our first round will be over the next 3 years with significant community engagement. So that might be inclusive of all of you as well to see what we're doing for universal preschool, what we're doing as a department, what would be helpful at the state level, what would be helpful at the local level to get input and make recommendations for us to meet the aspirational goals set for us in the law to blend and braid and get, the most bang for our buck that we can for our families and for our local communities. So excited to share more about that as we engage, and happy to, give updates to this group if that's helpful in writing or at your regularly scheduled meetings. Summer.
Thanks, Dawn, and thanks for fixing the audio too. I could hear a lot better towards
great.
The middle. That was helpful. So that you were talking about that RFP, and again, my ignorance is that I do policy work for Boulder County, not in human, I support the human services staff and obviously our director. So you may have already talked about this, but so universal pre-K, does it pay first and then CCAP pays on top of that? Because universal pre-K is for everybody and that state law that everybody should gets it, correct? And then the CCAP then cover that any gap, or how does that currently happen within the structure of how things are administered?
Sure. So that's separate of the RFP process, but that's what information is provided more specifically in detail in the informational memo. The state funding is similar if you participated in the Colorado preschool program funding. So families are able to receive and providers are able to receive the pay for the Colorado Universal Preschool Program first. And then in the informational memo, it's allowed to, it gives the specifics on how to blend and braid, if you will, or stack, as Sarah mentioned. So for example, a family might fill out a change when they start the Universal Preschool Program because they're receiving funding. Universal Preschool provides funding based on part-time. They're in a part-time program, which is a minimum of 10 hours per week. Half day, which is a minimum of 15 hours per week, or full day if they qualify, which is a minimum of 30 hours per week. And that's for the school year. And so there might be some offsets at that time for a particular family. But the informational memo gives information for the providers, and that might be helpful for you to have and utilize with those who are participating.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for that. And this is one quick follow-up, sorry, to that question is then, do we have an estimate of the cost savings to CCAP because of UPK? Like how much money did the state then save and have available for CCAP with UPK coming online? Do we have that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And that'll be part of this evaluation review process. So to look at our first year and then it will help us think through what the best next steps will be. We've had a lot of conversations with a CCAP working group over our first year with Sarah's team and with our program team, as well as many of you and our LCOs to kind of think through how are we meeting the statutory expectation. Of course, we all want to be good stewards of the funds, follow with integrity the expectations of the funds, and know that well, I would say if you were part of that group, you know, it took us a long time to talk through what does blending mean? What does braiding mean? What does stacking mean? And how do we move forward with integrity in that regard? Thanks, Sarah. If the money is stacked first in, then next, the money goes farther for the family, but may not be the total cost of care for the provider. And so this process that we agreed upon through that working group, which is in this memo Sarah linked, kind of defines how we do that. And we're really trying to find that sweet spot so that we're paying for the actual cost of care. And we're also getting the most for our families as well. And so those conversations will continue as we go through this evaluation process. The other challenge we had was figuring out who was duly enrolled. So if you were a part of that process, you know, and if you weren't, what we found is that it was hard to tell specifically where a child might be duly enrolled because we have different systems. And so we did a lot of work pulling data from the Universal Preschool application system and looking at who was enrolled in chats. And we have an ongoing effort to consider how we can best share that information with our local partners so that we can do, you know, provide the best services we can for our families at the local level. And that might get even more detailed for you all when you start to look by regions of your county, for example. And so that's ongoing work as well. Takes a lot of IT support, infrastructure, and we're really thinking through how we can do that best in a unified way. Heather.
Hi, Dawn. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
This is, well, I guess two questions, one for you and then one's a little bit broader. So I know counties received a data report on the dually enrolled children. And I know it took us quite a while to tweak that and make sure that we had the right report. Is that something that's available ongoing, or do we need to get a new report each school year? And then just because I know we're running out of time, I'll throw in my second question that might be worth us discussing at a future meeting. But in statute, the responsibilities and the role of the LCOs is much broader than just UPK. There's a lot in there about recruiting providers and helping to, I think, cross over more into CCAP so that they're helping to recruit providers and providing more of that technical assistance to CCAP providers, early childhood mental health. There's a lot in statute that they ultimately are responsible for. And so I think it would be good to have a conversation at some point about the plans to increase funding and increase capacity at LCOs to be able to help and partner differently with counties.
Yeah, really appreciate that. The data pull for the first question was a one-time pull. We recognize that isn't helpful. And so we're looking at, and Mary Alice can speak to in much more depth, how we're engaging to ensure, we want to be able to have data systems across with you all, but we also need to be looking at that with the new department as well and with our new program. So we are looking at how we can integrate real-time data in the chat dashboard, for example, what that might look like for you so you can see where there is. But we can absolutely do another data pull for year 2. I would say maybe one more month would probably be helpful because we do still have those applications coming in, and then you'll have at least probably what would be the largest data set to see where there might be dually enrolled. And then, yes, happy to have that conversation about our local leads and how we're working strategically with our local leads. We're talking about that across the department too, because we have incredible councils, which you all have there in Larimer County, who also happens to be the LCO. And then we have LCOs who are standalone. We have our family resource centers, and certainly starting to build the strategy across the department on how we can be efficient and effective across all of our local leads and what that might look like. And you're right, that's bigger than just the one program of universal preschool. So our LCOs certainly have scrubbed in to help us launch the program, but we're working with them as well in their different unique capacities to meet the larger charge that's in statute, which is bigger than just one program.
I'm sorry, but this is Commissioner Carrie Waring Gully, and I apologize that I didn't raise my hand and do the proper etiquette and all that good stuff. Just to kind of follow up on what Heather had said, I just recently went to an event in Arapahoe County with our amazing organization, Arapahoe County Early Childhood Council. And I did have a lot of questions about the work of the CCAP and everything that we've been talking about today. And so I do think that there is some really important work that needs to happen right now around timelines. Specifically, I had a lot of questions about, we've heard 2025, now we've heard 2026. What does this look like? And they've kind of sent me to say, please help, kind of thing. So I know in particular in Arapahoe County, we would love to have the presentations that have been, the presentation earlier today, just to kind of start having this conversation and how are we going to move there? How do schools look different than different providers, than individuals and faith-based groups? And so all of that is still is really out there churning. And I think it's important for us to recognize that, and that more information earlier is probably better, even if it isn't quite perfect, So I guess I would say, I think we would be happy to host you all to have some beginning conversations about some of this stuff. And maybe that's already happening. And if so, thank you for that.
Exit here for all engaged.
Let's see, I think Dr. Roy's at the airport, but Dr. Roy, if you want to chime in, please let us know. And absolutely, Commissioner, Bob actually just emailed me, so I'm writing an email back to Bob right now. But we would be happy to come and specifically talk to Arapahoe. We also have our county work session, mainly for directors tomorrow afternoon, where we're gonna dive in more on this. And tomorrow afternoon, we're really gonna dig in on wait lists and freezes and kind of what the logistics are of that, what the pros and cons are of that, learning kind of from some of our counties who are already on wait lists and freezes. So we'll have a really in-depth conversation about that tomorrow as well.
Thank you very much. And I know you work very extensively with Gretchen Davidson, but I'd be happy to let her know that we could start trying to set some stuff up to learn about CCAP and all of that with our individual providers as well. Thank you.
And just a question in the chat, yes, work sessions are recorded and I send out those recordings afterwards every month. I'm sorry, you always have a conflict there, Martha. We're a little bit over time, but my final wrap-up question is, do we want to do this again? Do we want to do this quarterly like we used to? And I think the answer is going to be yes. Does anyone want to chime in?
Yes.
Yes, and I would say maybe after the budget is released in early November, that might be good timing. Then we can follow up on the conversation I think that Commissioner Warren is suggesting too. Just my thoughts, but thank you all.
Yeah, Heather and Katie, again, this is Carrie Waring Gully. I'm wondering if maybe our Human Services group between CCI and CHSTA might be beneficial to kind of have a gathering too, so that we're all kind of on the same page and able to advocate and help with all of this as much as possible, particularly from the larger counties, because of the freezes and stuff that we know are coming.
I think that's a great idea, Commissioner. So I'm happy to connect with you and Heather, and maybe some others, or feel free to loop in others, so we can talk about that as well. And yeah, Terry, I think if folks sound amenable, and I know a lot is changing and happening over there, I think getting back into our quarterly rhythm is a great idea. So I'll reach out to you for dates on that. Well,
Great.
thanks everyone for being here, especially 7 minutes over, and early childhood department team, really appreciate just you being here and making the time to explain this all to us, let alone put in all the great work on it.
Thank you all, and we look forward to our next meeting with you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Everyone.
You too.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.